Okay. Boker tov lekulam. Good morning. So we were discussing in the past week. I'll give a quick reminder of what we were discussing in the past 2 weeks, and I'll share with you what we're going to do today. So in the last 2 weeks, meaning 2 weeks ago, we covered a large ground of Gemarah, if you remember, relatively 2 weeks ago. We explored the fact that there is a Tanaik machloket, regarding the case of a minority or an individual / minority that are following the mistaken ruling of Beit Din and eating the non-kosher item based on the ruling. Had it been that a majority would have followed the ruling, then a bull would have been brought and no one would bring an individual chatas. The thing is that here we're talking about a case that for some reason the majority didn't follow the ruling. Perhaps what happened was that Beit Din discovered the mistake earlier and they corrected themselves early enough publicly, or for any other reason, only a minority followed the false ruling, the incorrect, the mistaken ruling of Beit Din. And here the question was whether there's no doubt that in such a case a bull is not brought. Because a bull should meet 2 criteria. A, that there was a false ruling of the Sanhedrin. B, that the majority of Am Yisrael followed that ruling. This is learned from Psukim. It says, Im ne'elam me'einei ha'edah, meaning einei ha'edah, the eyes of the people. This is the Beit Din. And then it also says that hakahal, the people did it. So in order for that to be defined as people and not individuals, you need at least a majority. Okay? Now, what happens when there wasn't a majority? There was a false ruling of Beit Din, a mistaken ruling of Beit Din, but should the individuals bring individual chatas or not? Okay. That's the fundamental machloket of the Tanaim. Now we have seen a chakira of Reb Chaim. That's what we did last week. That Reb Chaim was trying to analyze whether when the bull is brought, is the fact that the bull is brought, the bull serves as the individual atonement of each person, and only because of that, one is exempt from individual chatas, as if his individual chatas is brought via the public bull, or no? He says no. The fact that the individuals are exempt from individual chatas is not because the bull is something else. The bull is a public atonement. It is just that there is a law that when there is a mistake of a majority based on a false ruling of Beit Din, then we know that in such a thing, this is already excluded from a category of individual sin. And what I wanted to say that this chakira, it's of course a lamdish chakira. But if you will think about it, and I won't elaborate on it, I just want to show you how here the lamdanut, the analytic Lithuanian learning, has to do with philosophy. Because what's really is at stake, perhaps behind the scenes, is a fundamental discussion. When a group is doing a mistake based on a ruling of the leaders of the group, the authority, how much do we see here individual responsibility or not? According to the first understanding, we see here individual responsibility, not only public responsibility. We see here individual responsibility. The thing is that the atonement is achieved via the public offering. According to the second understanding of Reb Chaim, that it's a separate law that when there is a mistake of a majority based on a false ruling of the leadership, then there is no individual chatas. It's excluded from the category of individual chatas. That might allude to a certain a certain conceptual understanding, philosophical understanding, that when there is such a group mistake, especially when it's based on the ruling of the leadership of the authority, then actually the individual responsibility is much less, or perhaps there is no need for individual atonement. You've seen how this Chakira that we explored last week and 2 weeks ago is really touching fundamental philosophical question, I would say, or psychological, groupthink, whatever. So I just wanted to add this. Is this understood? Yes, Gabe.
Yes, I have a question. I understand that if a minority does something, I understand what we're talking about, but where do you draw the line? What is the practical application of this? Because is it a significant minority? Is it a town? Is it a village? Is it a 30-70 division in the whole population? Or can it be even just a family? Or where do you draw the line in that situation?
Well, we will learn this, I guess, later on.
Okay.
The details of it. The details of it, okay? But currently, we've seen that the criteria for bringing a bull, okay, is that the majority of Am Yisrael will follow the mistaken ruling. Majority means majority. You count.
But we're talking now about...
One second. Majority means you count. Or, as we have seen, like in America with the electors, we're approaching elections, if there's 7 tribes out of 12, that might also be considered majority, even if when you count the people, because let's say it was 7 small tribes, okay, it won't be a majority. So you need a majority either of the popular vote or of the 7 out of 12. That's the initial answer. Perhaps we'll see it. I might be not accurate with some details. We'll see it later. But about anything less than that will be considered minority, meaning you're right. It could even be a substantial amount of people, theoretically, okay? And it will still be considered minority. Now, maybe what you want to say here is that I presented it as a philosophical question. The 2 sides of the Chakira of Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim was exploring why, when there is a majority, the individuals don't bring a private chatah. Yeah, and here his answer was either they're yotze via the bull, or no, it's not that they're yotze via the bull, it's just they're excluded. There's no individual chatas to begin with in such a case. And the second understanding, I explained that perhaps it says that when there is a majority mistake, what's something that is considered a public mistake, there's the level of the individual responsibility is very little, if at all.
Make sure the door is locked, that's why.
Here, what you could claim, perhaps, is that if there's a substantial minority, I would assume also maybe the individual chatas there is no big responsibility. I understand that question. Perhaps here the criteria is, do I see it as a group? And then you have to define what is a group or an individual. Now, of course, consequently, based on this Chakira of Reb Chaim regarding the case where a public bull is brought, we said, if you say that actually, even when there is a majority mistake based on a false ruling, there is an individual responsibility, only it's exempt via the bull, then it's clear cut that in a case of a minority, they'll have to bring the private chatas. If we say like the second understanding, here there's room for still dispute. One would say the only reason why there is no responsibility is because the majority, the public, did it. Here it's individual, so you have responsible. So we need to bring individual chatas. Or no, I will say the reason why, in the case of a majority following a false ruling, the reason why they were exempt from individual chatas is because they're based on a false ruling of Beit Din. Okay. So here I would say that even an individual following a mistaken ruling of Beit Din is already, since potentially had a public done it, you would have seen that it's exempt from individual chatas. So here also, there is no individual responsible, meaning it's even a step further in terms of lowering the individual responsibility. Now, what we've done last week, briefly, not briefly, we dedicated the entire share for it. We have seen that the understanding that the public bull is actually serving as also as an individual chatas for each of the members. Okay, we brought some proofs for that. First of all, of course, it fits well with the shita of Chachamim here, that when there is a minority, you bring individual chatas. But also what we've shown is that, and this we discovered Musaf, if you remember, and the difference between that and Korban Tzibur, is that it's not brought, that bull, in a case of a majority mistake, it's not, the bull is not brought from the annual campaign of the Shkalim. Rather, it's brought, there is a distinct separate campaign where you collect from each member. That perhaps in order to establish a more direct link between each member and the offering, perhaps so that it will serve as an individual kapara. Okay, that was one thing. The second example was the smicha, if you remember. The fact that on public offerings there is no smicha, putting the hand, and in the bull there is a smicha, perhaps again to illustrate the fact that it should be an atonement, a more direct link between each individual and the korban, each sinner. I illustrated the distinction with the opinion of the majority of the Achronim regarding Musaf. That Musaf is a korban tzibur, and it serves as a korban tzibur even for those who are exempt from donating to the annual campaign, because it's not an individual korban. It's not that each one that gave the shkalim has a portion in that korban. The public as an abstract entity, they are the owners of that korban. Therefore, Musaf, consequently, women are not exempt from davening Musaf because they're not excluded from Musaf, even though they're not donating to the shkalim. This is in juxtaposition to the public bull, where each one that donated has his portion, perhaps, in that korban. All right, now what I promised you to do this week is finally explore the question whether an individual or a minority that followed the false ruling of Beit Din, whether they're considered anus or not. Of course, that's true also for public who followed a false ruling. When one follows a false ruling of Sanhedrin, and he's innocently eating the non-kosher item because he innocently followed the false ruling of the Sanhedrin, is he considered Shogeg or anus? That could be, of course, the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. Yeah? The Tanaim, as we have shown, the Tanaim, we have an opinion that says that in a case of a minority following the false ruling of Beit Din, the individual do bring individual chatas. In order to explain that, we said that they must assume two assumptions. A, there is no anus here, meaning the fact that the majority, when they are following a false ruling of Beit Din, they're not bringing a public bull. It's not because they're considered anus. It's perhaps because the public bull serves as the individual atonement, okay? Or a different stam that they're, when there is a majority following a false ruling, then it's not the category of individual mistake. But it's not because of anus. Okay? If it, as we explained, Rabbi Yehuda's position, the Tana of our Mishnah's position, that also an individual following a false ruling of Beit Din is exempt from chatas, could be explained either because he sees it as anus. Remember, the first one that offered it was Moshe Eitel, or because it's excluded from the category of individual chatas, because potentially, if the majority would have done it, it wouldn't bring a chatas. So he also is excluded. It's not defined formally and halachically as an individual mistake. Okay? So these are the two options. As we've shown you, the nafkamina was the first Tosfot in our Masechet that was asking whether if a member of Sanhedrin actually followed his own ruling, and the majority of Am Yisrael didn't follow, but he followed his own ruling, will it be exempt from individual chatas or not? If the reason for the exemption, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is onus, then he won't be exempt, because he's not honest. He would just made a mistake. He's a member of Sanhedrin. But if it's just excluded from the category of individual chatas, because potentially had a majority of Am Yisrael followed that ruling, they wouldn't bring an individual chatas, then he might be exempt. At any rate, so now the shir from now on will be dedicated to actually analyze the question that might be at the core of the machloket, it's one of the options, whether a person who follows a false ruling of Beit Din, an individual, Sanhedrin, he's not a well-learned person, he's a simple Jew. The halachic authority, Sanhedrin, said that this item is mutter, and it turned out that they were mistaken. Based on their ruling, he ate the chalev. What do you say? I'm now asking the public. Is he considered anus or shogeg? I remind you, shogeg l'chora is someone who made a mistake, either regarding the identity of the item, or maybe regarding the law. Okay? So what do you say? Is this guy considered anus, like Rabbi Yehuda thinks, or perhaps thinks, or shogeg, like definitely chachamim think. Chachamim that obligate him to bring chatas definitely don't see it as anus. Intuitively, what makes more sense to you?
What is the basic definition of shogeg? Is it right? In other words, you have to come to the basic. How do we define onus and how do we define shogeg?
Right.
What situations are which?
So,
right, but shogeg is when I think when you make a mistake in judgment, you think it's good, but it's really wrong, rather than
right.
some external factor coming and forcing you to do it.
So here, first of all, you assume that they were forcing him to do it. Okay, that's an assumption. Meaning,
That's what the onus.
Yeah, Zish is saying the following: if, let's say, a commandment of lo tasur is applicable here,
Yeah.
then I would say it's an onus because it's a kind of a force. This simple Jew, what do you want from him? He was forced to eat the chalev. So perhaps you would say that the machlokas here, whether it's onus or not, the machlokas tanoim of Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, is perhaps really, and some achronim wanted to go in that direction, that really, really at the core of the machloket is something else, whether lo tasur is applicable here. Rabbi Yehuda thought that lo tasur is applicable here, and therefore he said it's not shogeg, it's onus. However, Chachamim said no. What happens is that since it turned out that it was a false ruling, then actually, retrospectively, we say it was a shgaga in lo tasur. It wasn't really, lo tasur wasn't really applicable here. Some achronim wanted to say, to go in that direction. I'm not sure it's so neat. Now, I want to show you first that this machloket, whether this is anus or not, could be analyzed and based on some other machlokot. So let's start our exploration. I'll share with you a screen. But before sharing this screen, you know what? I would just try, let's say Lo Tasur is not applicable here, okay? Let's say Lo Tasur doesn't apply here, okay? They said that this chaylev is mutter. Okay, it's mutter. So what? One is not really obligated to eat it, okay? Let's say. We saw that it's a machloket in understanding Lo Tasur. Now, still, one can say this is anus. Why? Because this Jew, he can't know better. This is the authority. That's the halacha book. So, okay, there's no lo tasur here. But still, he ate the chaylev based on the correct authority that said it. So I define it as anus. The other point of view will say, Chachama will say, no. Actually, every shogeg is a mistaken detail. So here, okay, that was the basis for the mistake. But at the end of the day, it was a mistake. Anus is something else. Anus is as is when someone forces you, when someone puts a gun. I'll try to be even more accurate here. The real question at stake, l'chora, is the following. As Zish said, what is really the definition of anus? Or we'll say, why is anus exempt from chatas and from any other consequence? Let's go to the most extreme. Let's now explore several levels of anus. Reb Aaron Soloveitchik made a distinction between two types of onus. There is an onus, the most extreme one is that when the person didn't even do the action, he was totally passive. Let's say a lady is chas v'shalom raped. She's not even doing an action. So here, that's the highest level of onus, meaning we can't see the persona, that's in my words, as doing an action. I remind you, responsibility, l'chora, as the Rambam taught us, responsibility and sachar va'onesh requires bchira chofshit, freedom of choice. Because I don't want to say that my body did a mistake or a sin. I want to say that I did a mistake. I is my personality. For that, you need to be connected to your senses. That's why in modern law, a psychotic person, and I'm dealing with this, a psychotic person is exempt from punishment. Why? Because that we assume that that psychotic person, let's say he chas v'shalom killed someone, but we prove in court that the reason why he killed that person is because voices came to his mind and said that he must kill that person. We don't see him as really responsible for what he did. It's as if some spirit invaded and took over him. It wasn't the I who did the sin. That is the basic philosophical foundation for why onus is exempt from punishment. Because I don't see here really a maisa avera done by the person. It's done by his body, but it's not done by his person, by the person. Now, the most extreme illustration of that is what I call the passive, meaning a lady that is raped, or let's say some biryonim, people that take, let's say, your body, pick you up without your will, and throw you on a person, and that person is being killed by the fact that they threw you. All of this, your involvement in the action as a persona is zero. That's the most extreme case of onus. The next level of onus, the lower level, but still defined as onus in Jewish law, is when someone puts a gun next to my head and tells me, now you do this, you sign this document, you kill that person, whatever, okay? Here, you did the action. You actually did decide to take the action. You were active in that action. When in the Seret Hasandak, how do you say it?
Godfather.
What?
The Godfather.
The Godfather, where he tells him you have two options, either to sign this document or to sign this document. Actually, the guy signed the document actively. Okay, his mind gave the order to the hand to sign the document. Only we say it was under coercion. And since it was under coercion, we say again that his responsibility, again, it's a lower degree of the I here, choosing to do the sin, or choosing or not careful enough from not doing the mistake, if we're talking about Shogeg. Because he actually, it's true that he actively signed it, but actually it was someone that was really threatening him to do it. So again, the free will here was very, very minimized. So that's the lower degree of onus, but still we say this is considered onus, that we won't define it as Shogeg. Now we come to our case. Our case is, we'll call it the third level, and that's why there is a machlokas regarding it. It's definitely not a case of onus of passive, meaning like a lady that is raped or a person that his body is thrown in order to kill someone. It's also not the case of someone coercing you by force, pushing your hand, having a gun, etc. However, there is some kinds of context and circumstances here that you say the person couldn't have known better. Okay? Let's show a case of that third onus. Rabban Soloveitchik made a distinction between two kinds of onus. Let's now see, wait a minute. Let's see the case of this third kind of onus, a classic one. And we'll see whether our case fits in that category or not. Look at the Rambam in Hilchos Shgagot. Everyone sees it with me? The Rambam in Hilchos Shgagos. Okay, the Rambam in Hilchos Shgagos. Let's look at it. Habal ishto shelo bishat vista. One is having intimate relationships with his wife at the time that she shouldn't have a period. So he's fine. He's acting properly. He's having relationships with his wife at the time that it's mutter. And then all of a sudden she saw blood at the time of the interaction. Says the Rambam, based on the Gemarah, Harei elu pturim mikorban chatat. They're both exempt from, they're not considered shogeg. Mipnei shezeh ke'anusu velo shogeg. Because this one is defined as an anus, it's not as a shogeg. Okay. Look, theoretically, this case is not so clear-cut. Let's think about it. When I eat a chaylev, okay, lahavdil. When I eat a chaylev, okay, let's do it even more simple. I go to a store and buy a candy bar that I was sure that is kosher. And I'll tell you why I was sure that it's kosher. I'm now making the case very relevant, meaning not theoretical at all. I went to a store. Let's say I'm not makbid on Chalav Yisrael. I'm basing myself on Reb Moshe and other poskim who are matir Chalav that is not Chalav Yisrael. So I buy a candy bar. Now this brand of candy bar has kashrus when it's made in Britain and in England. However, doesn't have kashrus when it's made in some other countries. Now I went to the store, I saw that candy bar, and I bought it and ate it. I was sure it's kosher. and turned out that it wasn't kosher. Now, is this anus or shogeg? Simple, what we know is we define this as shogeg, not as anus. Why? Now we'll say, look, you have some responsibility. It's true that it looks extremely similar. It's the same atifa, wrap, the same thing. But if you would look at the little letters, you would see that it said they're made in China. And it's not said they're made in Italy. Okay? And because of that, you shouldn't have eaten it and you should have checked it. Now, maybe I wasn't even aware of the fact. I was just taught by people, not Sanhedrin, that this candy bar is kosher because usually it's kosher. So I made a mistake. So I'm defined here as shogeg l'chora, not an anus. Let's say, by the way, that this wrap, I have no way to check it even because it's not written there made in what? It's totally identical. Will I here define it as anus or I'll say no? If you don't know, you should just not eat. Okay, it's a good question. I'm just showing you that l'chora we define. If we wouldn't learn this sugya, okay? If I would meet all of you 2 months ago, before we started learning Horayos, and I would ask you whether this guy that ate the candy bar, thinking that it's kosher, but it was really not kosher, you would define him as shogeg, not as anus. I bet you would have defined him as shogeg and not as anus.
Right.
So now let's go back to the Rambam's case. A person was with his wife. He was sure she's mutter. Also, he had all the grounds to think that she's mutter. But it turned out that she was usher. Who said that he's anus? Perhaps it's a mistake. It's shogeg. He made a mistake. He was with her willingly. No one coerced him to be with her. Now, it's true that it seemed to him that is mutter, and he didn't have much reason to inspect that she is not. But you know, the guy that took the candy bar also had very good reasons to think that the candy bar is kosher. And yet we still naturally say that he's shogeg, he's not honest. Why? Because it was a mistake. No one coerced him to do the action. It was a mistake. So I could say theoretically that when a husband is with his wife and it turned out that she was not permitted to him, that it's a mistake. Rambam, that it's not in the level of someone putting a gun next to you and forcing you to do the action, with all the respect. The Rambam here, as we've seen, broadens the scope of onus and says that this is onus. Why? And he feels, I'm just showing you that the Rambam feels that it's not trivial, that it's a broadening of onus, not only when you're passive, and not only when someone sticks a gun to you, but even when there is a uncontrollable mistake of circumstances. He says he is honest and not shogeg. Shogeg hayalo livdo. The shogeg had the responsibility to check and to check it well. And had he checked in a strict way and would have been precise with his questions, lo haya bali deishgaga, then he would have avoided that mistake. And since he was negligent, lo tarach, there is negligence here. Lo tarach b'drisha u'v'chakira, ve'achar kach yaseh. Since he first ate, then asked, instead of inquiring carefully before, and had he inquired carefully, the mistake would have been avoided. That's the definition, says the Rambam, of shogeg. Therefore, there's negligence here. And therefore, tzarich kapara. He requires atonement, and that's why he gets shogeg. Shogeg is for atonement. Atonement for what? For his negligence. Aval ze, this husband, malo lasot, what could he have done? Harayta oraita, she was pure. V'shelo bishat vistabal, and he came to her not in her period. Ein ze ela ones. This is required ones. He says the Rambam, for what will we bring a korban shogeg with all the mistake? For what will we bring korban shogeg? After all, what does he bring? What is his fault here? Ulefichach, bein shenimtza dam al ed shela, bein shenimtza al ed shelo, pturin. Whether blood was found on, however blood was found, they are exempt from chatas, both of them. They are considered anusim. So the Rambam broadened a little bit the scope of anus, not only when you're passive, let's say a lady that is raped, not only when someone sticks a gun to you, but also when there's uncontrollable mistake based on forces from heaven, we can say, like here, all of a sudden she saw blood, that is beyond your control. Okay, great. Of course, the Rambam has here a hidden assumption. Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt, but I just see something I never saw before, which is a difference between shogeg and ones in the following, if I could define it this way, the question you asked a little while ago, that shogeg is when if I knew the facts, I wouldn't have done it. That's shogeg. But ones is when if I knew the facts, I would do it anyway, which is true when the gun is at your head, when it's passive, and also in the case of the veset, because you still have, you can't say, I won't sleep with my wife, then you'll never sleep with your wife.
Right, but no, but I'll tell you why, Zish, I have a little slight, I understand what you're saying, and you're saying a correct thing. Zish, you're saying, Zish, you're saying a correct thing, but I think that but there is a subtle diuk here that we need to do. Because the way you phrased it is a little problematic, because this guy of the Rambam, had he known that there is blood, he wouldn't do it. Meaning, had he known the actually objective facts, he wouldn't have done it. The thing is, the point is that at the time of action, there was no way of him to know the facts. And therefore, his decision-making was not out of negligence. That's the point. He couldn't have inquired, he couldn't have known better at the time of action. That's the point the Rambam presses. And here, this is what I wanted to point out, because we'll see that not everyone necessarily agrees with the Rambam regarding that matter. The Rambam links chatas to fault, meaning there is some, if a person needs to bring chatas, it's because he has some fault here and needs atonement. If I clear that, then there is no chatas. I'll just here do the spoiler. Alternatively, one could have claimed that chatas is not because of ashma, because of fault. Chatas is just that when I do a certain sin, my personality does a certain sin, even if it's not my fault, there is some metaphysics, the fact that a human being actively did a sin, he ruined something in the world, a Jew. And therefore there is a need for chatas, atonement.
But that would also to honor.
Fault. And here the distinction will be the following. When someone puts to me the gun, then actually no persona did the action. Therefore, there was no metaphysical damage. It's just an accident that happened in the world, okay? Like a car accident. However, when I am eating a chalev, or when I am sleeping with my wife, and it's true that I have no fault, but the persona did the action that turned out objectively to be wrong, and he did it with his own free will, No one coerced him to do that. That's already a metaphysical damage, and a chatas should be brought. And of course, that's not like the Rambam understood. Because the Rambam linked it and he said it. The Shogeg needs to bring it because there is some negligence here. And here I want to show you that perhaps one can portray a view, okay, an option, a conceptual option, saying, no, Rambam, that's not the case. Onus is exempt because I define it as zero Maisa Avera. However, in these cases of the husband and of the person following the false ruling of Beidin, there is an action of Avera. It was beyond his control, but there is an action of Avera, so a chatas should be brought. So these are and perhaps what we said now is exactly Machloket Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. I know the only weakness according to that the Rambam here will fit with Rabbi Yehuda when really regarding Horayos, he is pasking like Chachamim. So we'll have to make a distinction within the Rambam. And by the way, I think it's possible. It's a little subtle. And we'll say, where the husband that was with his wife, it was really an onus because Mishamayim, there was a blood there. It's really beyond his control, so I see him as onus. Zero net. However, if it's a false ruling of Sanhedrin, even though this is a simple Jew and he's not expected to argue with them because he's not that well learned, but still it's not in the same level of objective onus as when a blood is all of a sudden coming, okay? And therefore, perhaps in the case of the husband, the Rambam defines it as an onus, meaning he says, here there is negligence, there is no negligence, whatever. It's not an action of the person. Whereas regarding the eating the chaylev of the simple Jew that followed the false ruling of Sanhedrin, he says, this is an action of Avera. This is considered a Maisa Avera because it's a mistake of human beings at the end of the day. Perhaps that's how we should figure out the Rambam. But I laid out to you the general views here regarding, and now let's continue and see how this is at a machloket of Tanaim and like we see here, and others, Rishonim perhaps also. So I'm going now back to the sheet that I wanted to share with you. Yeah. Let's see the Gemarah in Maseches Shabbos, okay? Let's learn together the machlok, the Gemarah here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. If you remember, Rabbi Yehuda is the person who said the Tana that our Gemarah wanted to attribute to the opinion of the Mishnah. But Rabbi Yehuda actually says that he's patur, perhaps because of onus. The one who followed, an individual who followed the false ruling of Beidin. So now let's see. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Im lo yachol echad lotzio. We're talking about the malacha of carrying an item from the private domain to the public domain, from Reshut Hayachid to Reshut Haramim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Im lo yachol echad lehotzio v'hotziu shnayim chayavin v'im lav pturin. If one person is not able to carry it out alone, and only as a team group of two, they're able to carry it, they're chayav. But if not, if each one can do it on his own, and still they choose to do it together, then it's considered an incomplete malacha, and they're exempt. Incomplete, you know, I'm using here the football term, incomplete. Yeah, it's an incomplete, and therefore there is no chatas. Rabbi Shimon Omer, afal pi shelo yachol echad lotzio, v'hotziu shnayim pturin. Okay, Rabbi Shimon says, no. Even when there is a need of a teamwork, so I could define it as a complete job when the two do, because each one on their own cannot do it, they're still exempt. Why? Because it's two and not one. Lekach ne'amar, he learns it from the pasuk. Ba'asota. It's the general pasuk regarding chatas. B'im nefesh echad techeda bishgaga ba'asota. When that individual nefesh is doing. And I learn at diuk, exclusion, yachid she'asa'a chayav. Only an individual who is doing the action has to bring chatas. Shnaim she'asa'ah, two that are doing it together, are exempt. And Rabbi Shimon says, the pasuk teaches me that two are exempt, even if each one on his own couldn't have done it by himself. Now the Gemara says, b'maika miflagi. What is really the core of the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon? Again, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if each one of them individually cannot do it, and they can only do it as a two, then they will have to bring chatas, both of them. We see it as one unit that did a malacha. And Rabbi Shimon says, no. Only individuals doing a malacha bring chatas. But if two people are doing it together in a teamwork, even if each one of them on their own couldn't have done it alone, they will be exempt. So, b'maika miflage, what is the machlokes? In this pasuk, b'aikra, ve'im nefesh achat techeta bishgega ma'am haaretz ba'asota. That's how the paragraph regarding individual chatas starts. If one personality will make a mistake, a sin, inadvertently, from the public, me'am haaretz ba'asota, doing it. Rabbi Shimon savar, klata mi'ute ktivi. Rabbi Shimon holds that there are three exclusions written. Nefesh techeta, achat techeta, ba'asota techeta. Chad lemi'ute ze oker v'ze meniach. One, in order to exclude from chatas the case of one person pulling it out of the of the private domain, and the other takes it over and places it in the public domain. So ze oker v'ze meniach. Chad lemi'ute, one to exclude ze yachol v'ze yachol, when each one of them is capable of doing it on his own, but they carried it all the way together. The chad, and the last exclusion, says Rabbi Shimon, is ze eino yachol, v'ze eino yachol, that even in a case where each one of them individually couldn't have done it, and only as a teamwork they could have done it, but I have that exclusion of achat to tell me that it's only when an individual doing the malach. Rabbi Yehuda obviously that thinks that in such a case he's chayav, meaning Rabbi Yehuda thinks that if two people do it together when each one of them individually couldn't have done it, wasn't capable of doing it, then they're chayav. So he needs that exclusion for another din. Rabbi Yehuda, chad lemi'ute ze oker v'ze meniach, v'chad lemi'ute ze yachol v'ze yachol. Another exclusion is for ken chad lemi'ute ze yachol v'ze yachol, when each one of them can do it on his own. V'chad lemi'ute yachid shosa boras beidin. Yeah? This is our case. This is our Rabbi Yehuda that was quoted in the Gemarah that claims, like the Tan of our Mishnah, that an individual following a false ruling of beidin is excluded from Shogeg, from chatas. Rabbi Shimon, what does Rabbi Shimon think? Yachid sha'ata borat beidin chayav. Yeah, Rabbi Shimon is the Tana who is together with Chachamim. Okay? By the way, it's interesting because there was an attempt later to make a shidduch between Rabbi Shimon and the Tana of our Mishnah, but here you see clearly that Rabbi Shimon is exactly like Chachamim that are disputing with the Tana of our Mishnah. Excuse me, I'm doing it on Machloket Rashi and Tosafot, what I'm saying here. Erase what I said. Rabbi Shimon says, Yachid shasa borat beidin chaya. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon doesn't think it's onus. Rabbi Meir, okay, Rabbi Meir is the third opinion there. Miktiv nefesh techeta, achat techeta, basota techeta. Trei miute ktivi, chad lemiute ze oker v'ze meniach, chad lemiute yachid shasa borat beidin. The Meir holds that when two people are doing the malacha together, they're chayev even when both are capable individually. He's the most extreme opinion. Here, I'll make your seder. Regarding two people taking the item together, pulling it out from the private domain, and placing it together in the public domain, there are three opinions. Three. Rabbi Meir holds that they're always chayavim. Rabbi Shimon claims that if each one is capable individually, then they're exempt. And if each one is not capable on his own, they're chayav. Rabbi Yehuda is the most extreme. No, excuse me. Rabbi Shimon says, one second. Right. Excuse me. Again, do it over. Rabbi Meir says the following. Rabbi Meir says two people carrying the item together, they're always chayav. Always chayav. So what do I use the exclusions from Chatas for? Yachid Shasa Borat Beidin, our case, that he's pater, like the ton of our Mishnah, and to exempt Ze'oker v'Zemeniach, that they didn't mamash carry together, but just one did half and the other did half. So Rabbi Shimon says that two people carrying the item together, they're always high. Rabbi Yehuda says it depends. If each one is capable on his own, they're exempt. And if each one is not capable on his own, they're chayav. And Rabbi Shimon says they're always chayav. So they're always pater. Excuse me, they're always pater. Rabbi Meir said they're always chayav. Rabbi Shimon said they're always pater, the two. And Rabbi Shimon claims that one that is carrying, the one that is following the false ruling of Beidin is chayav. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, they claim that he's pater. Now let's see Rashi. Yachid shasa boras Beidin. Okay, just before we see the Rashi. As we have seen, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir learned from a pasuk, a paragraph in Chatas, a miyut, ba'asota achat. They learned from an exclusion of a pasuk that one who followed the false ruling of Beidin is exempt from individual Chatas. And Rabbi Shimon, who disputes with him, Chachamim, they just didn't have that limud. So they said that wasn't excluded from Chatas. It seems that it's a machloket in the definition, therefore, of Shogeg, of Chag. What is part of individual Chatas and what is not? Theoretically, I can understand this pasuk in this machlokes. How do I darshaning the psukim? In one of two ways. Either the machloket is whether this is defined shogeg or anus, exactly our discussion. Meaning, when the Tanaim say be'asota achat lemiute to exclude yachid shasa borat beidin, the exclusion teaches me that the definition of ones is broader, and this is ones, not shogeg. Or what seems a little bit more plausible, that if I need a pasuk here and it's not a svara, perhaps the pasuk teaches me not that it's ones, but it just teaches me that it's excluded from the category of individual chatas, since it's based on a false ruling of Beidin that can potentially lead for a public bull. This is excluded from individual chatas. So this could be how I learn, but there's still the first option that, since, as I've shown you, there are two options to understand conceptually what is shogeg and what is chatas. Is it because of some fault, or it's because of a metaphysic damage that happened by an agent doing a mistake? So I need a pasuk, and perhaps that's the core of the machloket regarding the limud of the pasuk. So now let's see how the different Rishonim explain this Gemara. Rashi, Yachid shasa borat beidin, patur. Horu, Rashi explains here in Masechet Shabbos. Horu beidin, shechelev mutter. Ve'alacha yachid v'asal piem, de'anusu. Look at that. Rashi says here, shachor agabei lavan. We had a chakira. I told you the chakira. Here what Moshe Eitel said is explicit in Rashi. Rashi says that the reason why Rabbi Shimon why Rabbi Yehuda is defining, Rabbi Meir are defining this guy as someone who's exempt from individual chatas, the Tana of our Mishnah, is because he's honest. And Rabbi Shimon, Latame, Rabbi Shimon follows his own opinion. The Amar Behorayos, Yachid Shasar Borat Beidin Chayav. Rabbi Shimon actually, it seems, disagrees with it, and he says it follows his opinion in Horayot. Rashi claims that in Horayos, and we'll find where, that in Horayos it's explicit. Rabbi Shimon, just like here, says Rabbi Shimon Yachid Shasar Borat Beidin Chayav. He's like the Shita of Chachamim. Therefore, it's not Anos, it is Shogeg. Tosfot. Look at Tosfot. Tosfot says, has a different girsa than Rashi here in the Gemarah and Shabbos. Hachi Garsimon, Garsina. For Rabbi Shimon, Yachid Shasar Borat Beidin, look at that. He does, not like our text that says Chayav. Lo tzarich kra. Look at that. Below Garsina and Rabbi Shimon Latame, Damar Yachid Shasar Borat Beidin Chayav Kedeperish Bekuntis. Datnan be'edia beperakama de Horayot alach v'asal pien bein aviu kapartan bein lo Rabbi Shimon poter umefarish taima tole v'beidin anusu. Look at that. Very important to explain. This is a fundamental machloket between Rashi and Tosfot that has exactly a link to our discussions here. Rabbi Shimon, as we explained, Rabbi Shimon, he holds that the three exclusions in the pasuk regarding individual chatas, all of these three are not teaching me Yachid Shasar Borat Beidin, right? So there are two options here. One is the way Rashi learned it, that Rabbi Shimon is disputing. And Rabbi Shimon holds that an individual follow the false ruling of Beit Din is chayev. He's not an honest. Tosfos says something fascinating. Tosfos says, no, he agrees that he's honest. Everyone here says that the individual that followed the false ruling of Beit Din is exempt. Rabbi Shimon says, I don't need a pasuk for that. Because it's honest. Honest, I have a general spara, honest Rahmana Patre. So I don't need a verse here. So therefore, I have all the three exclusions left for two that did it together when each one is not capable, two that did it together when each one is capable, and one that did halfway and one that did halfway. Because the fact that an individual following a false ruling of Beit Din is exempt, I don't need a pasuk for that at all. He's anus. An individual following a false ruling of Beit Din is an anus. Therefore, there's no chatas, and I don't need a pasuk for that. What did Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir that needed a pasuk according to Tosfot held? Perhaps, look at that. Look at how nice it is. Perhaps it's a machloket within that opinion. Exactly our chakira. Look how nice it is. Already in the first shiurim, I said, the opinion that said that an individual who followed a false ruling of Beit Din is exempt. I said there are two options. Either he's exempt because of anus, or he's exempt because he's excluded from the category of individual chatas, because potentially there could be a rebul. Look at that. According to Tosfot, this is exactly the machlokas of the Tanaim in the Gemarah and Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon, who says that he's exempt and I don't need even a pasuk for that, he learns that he's exempt because of onus. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, they say, no, this is not onus. I'm sorry. If from the perspective of onus versus shogeg, this is shogeg. This is shogeg. An agent did an action willingly because of mistakes of the circumstances that Beit Din gave him a false information. This is not onus. This is shogeg, say Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. However, he's exempt from chatas. Why? Because of a pasuk. Gzeras hakatov. That Gzeras hakatov doesn't teach me that it's onus. It teaches me that it's excluded from the category achat. Yeah, they learn it from the word achat, individual. An individual following a false ruling of the Beidin, of the public Beidin, where potentially it could be a public vote, this is already excluded from nefesh achat. So this is, according to Tosfot, look how nice it is. The machloket between the Tanaim, all of the Tanaim there, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Shimon, all hold that an individual following a false ruling of Beidin is exempt from chatas. The only thing is that, whereas Rabbi Shimon says, I don't need a pasuk for that, I have a svar, it's anus, because my concept is like what we've seen in the Rambam, that shgaga has to do with fault. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir say, no, this is not anus, this is shogeg. But in this specific case, he's excluded from individual chatas. I learned it from the pasuk because it's a false ruling of Sanhedrin and it could potentially be a public vote. Okay, so that's according to Tosfot. According to Rashi, of course, the Gemarah there is different. The Gemarah just says there is a machloket between, just like here, there's a machloket between Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. So there it's a machloket between Chachamim, i.e. Rabbi Shimon, and on the other hand, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir hold that it's anus, and the pasuk teaches them that it's anus. According to Rashi, you need a pasuk to teach you that it's anus. And Rabbi Shimon just doesn't have that pasuk, and he consequently claims it's not anus. Okay, very, very good. Now, we'll just do a tiny more bit, mamash few moments. Right, you know what? Yeah, we'll do just this piece. The Gemarah in Bava Kama. No, you know what? We'll leave that for next week. Okay. Next week, Chaverim, look, we laid out here the fundamentals of the things. What could be the core of the machloket, whether in such a case to define it as anus or not. We laid that out. The machloket of the Tanaim and our Gemarah. And as we've seen in the Gemarah in Masechet Shabbos. What we'll do next week, and believe me, I think it will take some like 10, 15 minutes, not more. We'll just complete the source sheet because now it will just run. We have the conceptual foundations. We don't need to analyze anything more. We just need to see things inside. And once we're done with that, that will probably be by 9:30, approximately. Then we'll continue covering Gemarah. As we've seen, there's some interesting machlokos in the Gemarah, so we'll cover them and analyze them. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.